The Young and the Restless spoilers Fridays full the 2nd of January 2025. As Genoa City prepared to slide quietly from one year into the next, the surface comm concealed a network of intersecting choices that would redefine loyalties, reopen emotional wounds, and quietly realign power between families that had never truly stopped competing. New Year's Eve did not arrive with fireworks or grand declarations for Sally Spectra and Adam Newman, but with something far more symbolic, an accidental exchange of takeout bags at Society. A mundane mistake that immediately echoed the long history of missteps, near misses, and unresolved connections between them. When they realized the mix-up and returned to correct it, the moment felt oddly familiar, as though fate itself had nudged them together one last time before the year expired, not to reunite them, but to force an honest reckoning neither had truly completed. Sally's casual reference to the ongoing Abbott-Newman war carried more weight than she intended, especially when she pointed out Adam's decision to step aside for Victor, framing it not as weakness but as a conscious surrender to a cycle that had consumed too much of his life. Adam's instinctive question about whether she was heading home to Billy revealed how deeply the past still shaped his assumptions. And her calm response that Billy was away on business only reinforced the uncomfortable truth that Adam still measured his relevance in her life by the men who followed him. When Adam admitted that Chelsea Newman was sick at home, the vulnerability beneath his usual guarded tone became harder to ignore. And his suggestion that they go out for a drink together was less about nostalgia than about relief, a brief ceasefire from the identities they were expected to perform. Their mutual agreement to avoid work talk was almost ironic, given how deeply their personal lives had always been entangled with corporate warfare. But it allowed them to drift into memories instead, specifically the first New Year's Eve they had spent together years ago, when defiance had felt romantic and not yet burdened by consequence. Sally's inquiry about Chelsea's well-being was sincere, not competitive, and Adam's assurance that everything was fine rang hollow even to himself, because the truth was more complicated than reassurance allowed. His confession that Chelsea's closeness to Billy Abbott unsettled him exposed a fracture he had tried to seal with logic, and when Sally insisted she was happy, the statement sounded more like a decision than a reflection of reality. Adam's warning about Billy's unpredictability did not come from jealousy alone, but from experience. And when he admitted he did not want Sally to get hurt, the concern stripped away any illusion that their bond had ever truly ended. Her reaction, subtle but telling, revealed that the doubt he voiced already lived inside her, unspoken but persistent, and in that shared moment of honesty, they reached a fragile understanding neither of them named. As the countdown to the new year began, they raised their glasses not in celebration of what might come, but in quiet acknowledgement of what had shaped them. Aware that some connections do not disappear simply because circumstances demand they should. The arrival of the new year marked not closure, but suspension, leaving both of them poised between restraint and regret, knowing that unresolved emotions rarely remain dormant for long. Elsewhere in Genoa City, the consequences of choice unfolded along a far more dangerous trajectory. Kyle Abbott, increasingly aware that independence offered no protection from fallout, turned to Victoria Newman for help. A decision that spoke volumes about how deeply the Abbott-Newman rivalry had eroded traditional lines of loyalty. Kyle's request was not born of weakness, but of calculation. A recognition that Victoria's strategic mind and command of power could provide insulation from forces he no longer felt equipped to handle alone. For Victoria, agreeing to listen did not mean allegiance, but it did signal opportunity. Because helping Kyle positioned her at a crossroads where influence could quietly be expanded without overt confrontation. Their interaction underscored a growing truth within Genoa City, that survival increasingly depended not on family name, but on adaptability. And that alliances once considered unthinkable were becoming not only possible, but necessary. At the same time, a far more intimate betrayal was taking shape, one that would leave emotional wreckage long after the new year settled in. Tessa Porter, already standing at the center of Mariah's unspoken fears, crossed a line that could not be softened by justification when she became physically involved with Daniel Romelodi Jr. The act itself was not driven by passion alone, but by avoidance, a momentary escape from accountability that would ultimately demand a far greater price. For Daniel, the choice blurred boundaries he had pretended not to notice, while for Tessa it represented a collapse of restraint that confirmed what Mariah had sensed long before proof existed. The intimacy between them did not resolve confusion. It amplified it, creating a situation where silence became complicity and denial transformed into strategy. As the year turned, Genoa City did not reset itself. Instead, it absorbed these moments like pressure points, storing them beneath the surface until they would inevitably resurface in altered form. Adam and Sally's unresolved connection lingered like a quiet echo. Kyle's outreach to Victoria hinted at shifting power dynamics that could destabilize both families. And Tessa and Daniel's decision planted the seeds of a reckoning that would extend far beyond a single betrayal. New Year's Eve promised renewal, but what it delivered instead was momentum, pushing every character closer to the consequences they had tried to outrun, and proving once again that in Genoa City, the future is never a clean break from the past, but an extension of it, sharpened by choice and burdened by memory. At the Genoa City Athletic Club, the atmosphere carried a deceptive calm, the kind that often settled just before emotional truths surfaced. It was there that Kyle Abbott unexpectedly crossed paths with Victoria Newman, and the coincidence felt less accidental than inevitable, as though unresolved choices had quietly drawn them into the same space. Kyle did not approach Victoria with defensiveness or bravado, but with a subdued resolve that revealed how much had already been decided before he ever spoke. He told her that he had chosen to let go of Claire Newman, not because his feelings had vanished, but because the weight of conflict surrounding that relationship had grown heavier than the relationship itself. Victoria's response was not judgmental, but reflective, reminding him that nothing meaningful in Genoa City had ever come without resistance, and that every bond tied to the Newman name was forged under pressure. Her words forced Kyle to confront the uncomfortable truth that perseverance and pride were not the same thing, and that sometimes walking away was not surrender, but self-preservation. Kyle openly acknowledged his own missteps, admitting that he had underestimated the cost of defying entrenched power structures, especially when those structures bore the unmistakable shadow of Victor Newman. He spoke of Victor not merely as an adversary, but as a force capable of reshaping entire families through sheer will. And he questioned whether his own isolation could paradoxically serve as a peace offering. If his family were to distance themselves from him, he reasoned perhaps Victor would finally lose interest in punishing the Abbotts through him. This line of thinking revealed how deeply Kyle had internalized responsibility for a feud far older than himself. And when he asked whether Victoria and Nikki Newman could persuade Victor to abandon his pursuit of Jabot, the question carried both hope and resignation. Victoria's answer was honest in its restraint. She did not offer false optimism, acknowledging that Victor remained immovable in his convictions, yet she committed herself to trying. Not because she believed she could change him, but because the promise of a quieter year was worth the attempt. Her resolve signaled a subtle shift in the Newman approach, one that favored containment over conquest, even if success remained uncertain. While corporate tensions simmered back in Genoa City, an entirely different reckoning unfolded aboard Kane Ashby's train, where isolation had been both shield and punishment for Kane Ashby. Kane's expectation of solitude was shattered when Lily Winters appeared, her presence cutting through his carefully maintained emotional distance. His visible happiness at seeing her was unguarded, exposing how deeply he had underestimated his lingering attachment. He admitted that he had planned to spend New Year's Eve alone, and the relief he felt at her arrival underscored how hollow that plan truly was. His gesture of offering champagne and strawberries was meant to recreate warmth, to recapture a version of intimacy that once felt effortless, but Lily's response grounded the moment in reality. She refused to allow nostalgia to blur judgment, cautioning him against mistaking a successful public event for personal transformation. Kane insisted that they had enjoyed themselves at the launch party, clinging to that memory as proof that connection still existed. But Lily dismantled that illusion with painful clarity. She recognized that the man she had seen that night was a performance rather than an evolution, and she articulated the growing distance between them not as a sudden rupture, but as the inevitable result of unresolved patterns. Her belief that reunion was no longer possible stemmed not from lack of feeling, but from an accumulation of disappointment that could no longer be ignored. Kane's sadness in that moment was raw, stripped of bravado, and his question about why she had come at all betrayed both confusion and vulnerability. To him, her presence without reconciliation felt cruel, even irrational. Lily's response was not fueled by spite, but by resolve. She confronted him with the reality that his tendency toward deception had not disappeared, only adapted, and when Kane challenged her to name what had changed between the launch party and now, he revealed how disconnected he remained from the impact of his actions. The gap Lily pointed to was not defined by a single lie, but by a pattern of emotional misrepresentation that eroded trust over time. Her decision to show up was not an invitation to reunite, but a final attempt to see whether truth could exist between them without illusion. In that sense, the encounter served as a quiet verdict rather than a dramatic confrontation, confirming that some relationships do not end in explosion, but in clarity. As these moments unfolded in parallel, the approaching new year did not promise clean beginnings for anyone involved. Kyle's withdrawal from Claire signaled a painful recalibration of loyalty and identity. Victoria's cautious diplomacy hinted at fragile shifts in long-standing warfare. And Kane and Lily's encounter underscored how love can persist even when reconciliation is no longer possible. Each storyline converged around the same unspoken truth, that peace, whether personal or corporate, often demands loss, and that moving forward sometimes requires accepting that certain doors will remain permanently closed. In Genoa City, the year did not turn with celebration alone, but with reckoning, leaving every character standing at the threshold of consequences they could no longer avoid. On the train, the gentle sway of the carriage and the muted thrum of the tracks beneath them did nothing to soften the sharp edge of what Lily had come there to say. The illusion of warmth that had briefly surrounded their earlier laughter and the shared memory of the launch party evaporated the moment she finally allowed the truth to surface. She told Kane she had seen him kissing Phyllis Summers, and the humiliation in that admission cut deeper than any accusation because it exposed not only his actions but her own vulnerability. She confessed, in her own restrained way, that it had happened right after what she considered a beautiful night between them, a rare night that had made her think, just for a moment, that perhaps there was still a pathway back to each other. To realize that almost immediately afterward he had allowed another woman to cross a line with him made her feel naive, foolish, and painfully exposed. Kane tried to defend himself, insisting that what she thought she had seen was not the full story, that the moment had not unfolded the way it appeared. But Lily would not let him drag her back into the familiar cycle where he shaped reality with half-truths and strategic omissions. She told him she was done being tricked, done letting him rearrange facts until she doubted her own perceptions. Still, Kane did not retreat. He clarified that the kiss with Phyllis had not been his choice, that she had been the one to initiate it, and that he had broken it off as soon as he realized what was happening. He insisted he would never knowingly risk losing Lily again, not after everything that had already been shattered between them. In his mind, his quick withdrawal from that brief, unwanted intimacy should have proved his loyalty, but from Lily's perspective, the damage lay less in the physical act than in the position he had allowed himself to be in at all. The fact that another woman felt comfortable enough to reach for him like that said something about the boundaries he was or was not enforcing in his life. When he told her there was only one woman he loved, and that woman was her, the words were heavy with sincerity. But sincerity on its own had long ago stopped being enough. Lily told him she had come on that train to draw a final line, to tell him plainly to keep his distance from her, to stop orbiting her life with promises he could not fully uphold. Yet Kane seized on the contradiction inherent in her presence. If she truly wanted him gone, he argued, she would not have come. She would not have boarded the train, would not have put herself in this private space with him where memories wrapped around them like a second skin. He pushed further. exposing the thin wall she had tried to build between resolve and desire. He suggested that she wanted him just as much as he wanted her, that some part of her had not only allowed but compelled her to seek him out. He urged her to stop pretending they did not belong together, to stop pretending that history, shared children, and the way her body still reacted when he stood close were meaningless. The more he spoke, the more Lily's restraint began to crack around the edges, not because his words were entirely persuasive, but because they scraped against truths she had tried so hard to bury. She had missed him, not just the idea of him but the reality of his presence, the way he filled a room, the way he could still read her moods with unsettling accuracy. She had come to set boundaries, but she had also come seeking clarity, and the honesty of that second motive made her feel both strong and ashamed. When he stepped closer, closing the small space between them, the air seemed to thicken. He begged her in quieter, more exposed terms to allow him to love her again, not from a distance, not as an ex-husband forever paying for his old sins, but as a man who still believed that they were meant to share a life. The moment stretched, suspended between everything they had been and everything they might still become. Lily knew she should pull back, that she should end the conversation and walk away with her decision intact. Instead, memories rose in a tide she could not hold back. The early days when they had trusted each other without reservation, the family they had built, the times they had survived storms that would have destroyed weaker couples. She questioned whether forgiveness was truly impossible or whether she was simply afraid of getting hurt again. Afraid that to open the door even a fraction would invite another wave of chaos into her life. When Kane finally leaned in and kissed her, it was not tentative or manipulative but charged with a desperate longing that had been building since the day they first fell apart. For a heartbeat she remained rigid, but then instinct overrode intention, and she kissed him back. The familiarity of it was disarming, the way their bodies remembered what their rational minds had tried to forget. In that brief, stolen moment, it felt as if the distance between them had never existed, as if all the scars could be smoothed over by the force of what still flickered between them. But even as she responded, a second awareness burned beneath the surface, whispering that this was not a solution, only a dangerous reprieve. When their lips parted, the world did not magically reassemble itself into a version where betrayal had not occurred and lies had not been told. Instead, Lily was left more conflicted than before, torn between the undeniable pull of a man she had once believed to be her forever and the equally undeniable truth that trust, once fractured, does not simply regenerate because desire still exists. Kane, for his part, clung to the kiss as proof that there was still hope, that no matter how much she pushed him away with words, her heart had not completely sealed itself off. He began to imagine a future again, one where this moment on the train would be remembered as the turning point that led them back to each other. Yet the fragility of that hope was clear. Their reconciliation, if it ever truly came, would require more than a single desperate embrace. It would demand a rewriting of patterns, a discipline neither of them had fully mastered. And the uncertainty of that was etched in the way Lily could not meet his eyes for too long afterward without feeling the sting of everything unresolved. Far from the intimacy of the train, another fracture was quietly widening, one that carried a different kind of danger. Daniel Romolotti found himself unsettled by an absence that had stretched from uncomfortable to alarming. He asked Tessa what was really happening with Mariah Copeland, because the vague references and forced optimism no longer aligned with the unease clawing at the edges of his conscience. Tessa's response was simple on the surface, but heavy with something unspoken. She admitted that she had lost contact with Mariah. That admission was more than a logistical update. It was an acknowledgement of emotional distance, of a bond that had thinned to the point of snapping. When Daniel pressed further, wanting to know what Mariah had done or where she had gone, Tessa explained that Mariah had left the clinic, discharging herself against the plan that had been carefully drawn up for her recovery. She had assumed, or perhaps convinced herself, that Mariah would go home, that she would retreat to familiar walls and to Annie. Using the safety of motherhood as a shield against whatever turmoil was consuming her from within. But reality did not oblige that comforting assumption. Instead of a message indicating safe arrival or a call of reassurance, Tessa received a stark, unsettling text from her wife stating only that she had checked herself out. There was no confirmation of destination, no invitation to talk, no explanation of why. Just a blunt statement that she had stepped outside the system meant to hold her together. The more Tessa replayed that message, the more it sounded like a closing door rather than a simple change of logistics. In the quiet space between herself and Daniel, guilt pressed down hard. She knew on some level that her own actions had contributed to this unraveling, that the blurred lines, the ill-timed intimacy with Daniel, and the emotional neglect that had followed had all chipped away at Mariah's already fragile sense of self. What frightened Tessa most was not that Mariah was angry. It was the possibility that Mariah had reached a state beyond anger, a place where she no longer believed anyone could or would protect her from the storm inside her mind. Daniel felt a different but related weight. He had allowed himself to cross boundaries that should have remained intact, rationalizing in the moment that his connection with Tessa was a fleeting comfort, something contained and controllable. But seeing the fallout, even indirectly, forced him to confront the fact that nothing in Genoa City was ever truly contained. Every decision bled outward, staining people who never had the chance to consent to the consequences. Mariah's absence ceased to be an abstract concern and became a problem with jagged edges. He could not shake the mental image of her leaving the clinic alone, carrying more pain than anyone had been paying proper attention to. Walking toward an unknown that might include decisions as dangerous as the ones Tessa and Daniel themselves had been making in private. Neither of them knew where she was or what state she was in, only that she had quietly removed herself from the last place designed to keep her grounded. The tension between Kane and Lily on the train and the unease surrounding Mariah's disappearance were not separate threads so much as reflections of the same underlying truth. Running through Genoa City, that love, once damaged, sends people into extremes. Some run back to what hurt them, clinging to the idea that it can be repaired through sheer will and chemistry. Others run away from everything, convinced that isolation is safer than risking further betrayal. Kane, with his desperate kiss and renewed promises, stood at the edge of a path that might lead back to family or might plunge them all into another cycle of heartbreak. Lily, with her divided heart and sharpened clarity, had to decide whether this new intimacy was a step forward or a dangerous relapse. Tessa and Daniel, bound by a shared secret that neither of them fully understood how to carry, faced the possibility that the person most affected by their choices was out there somewhere, invisible and spiraling, perhaps with thoughts and plans neither of them would be able to predict. As the metaphorical clock ticked toward a new year, it became increasingly clear that no clean reset was coming for any of them. The emotional terrain was already seeded with too many unresolved conflicts, unspoken fears, and half-buried mistakes. Whether on a moving train or in a quiet room lit only by a phone screen and a single alarming text, the people of Genoa City were confronting the same reality, that the past does not let go easily, and that every kiss, every lie, every disappearance echoes longer than anyone intends. Whatever Mariah chose to do next, wherever she had gone after walking out of that clinic, would eventually collide with the choices Kane and Lily were making in their fragile almost reunion, and with the silent guilt fermenting between Tessa and Daniel. The year ahead would not be about simple reunions or clean breakups. It would be about exposure, about secrets loosening their grip on shadows, and about each character discovering what happens when the consequences they try to outrun finally find them.